Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm doing a hard drive install today on a laptop. I got a SSD drive we're going to be installing. It's a 240 gig, just a SanDisk SSD. They're pretty decent drives, better than your conventional spinning disk that most computers used to come with. Anymore, a lot of the computers nowadays come with these SSDs. They're a lot more reliable and a lot quicker boot times than your conventional spinning disk that most people are used to, and they're not susceptible to being banged around and dropped. You won't have to worry about losing data like on a conventional spinning disk. And they're pretty good drives. They've come down a lot in price compared to what they used to be. Used to be fairly expensive, and so yeah, I really like them. I have a few of them. I still have quite a few spinning disk drives, and you can get some of the spinning disk drives for pretty cheap these days as well. You get like 2 and 4 terabyte drives, enterprise drives. You can find them, especially like the refurbished ones, for really cheap, all over the place. But if you want something that's gonna cause or help your computer boot up a lot quicker, on a budget, this drive here was about 35 bucks on Amazon, and it's 240 gig, and it'll definitely increase your boot time and just your computer's overall speed, especially if you have a laptop where there's only a few upgrades that you can really do to help boost its speed. RAM, memory, and a hard drive. So just RAM upgrade and hard drive upgrade. About the only two things that you can really do to help boost performance on a laptop, especially if it's an older laptop. Some laptops you can get different hard drives for, and excuse me, different CPUs and upgrade CPUs within reason, but usually that's about the only three things that you can do: CPU, memory, and hard drive. So we're going to go ahead and install this hard drive in this Acer laptop here, and I've already backed up the information off of this computer's hard drive. And the main reason for the replacement in this computer is the hard drive is actually failing in it. We tried clearing the drive, formatting it, and reinstalling Windows, and after checking the drive, realized that the drive will intermittently power down on you. So the hard drive itself is no good. It's failed, so it's definitely due for a new hard drive. So we're going to replace this hard drive out with this newer hard drive and get it set back up for the customer. And this should definitely improve this laptop, make it a lot more quick. Definitely a big noticeable difference compared to what the customer was used to. They had a couple other laptops, and they wanted me to fix those as well. And the one laptop, they were wanting me to essentially just take the hard drive out of it and swap it in here. And it was an older laptop as well, because the motherboard on it, the video portion of the motherboard was no good, so it had no display. And I explained to him that we could do that. We could take the other hard drive out of there, but for the cost of a new hard drive, compared to if we take the drive out of the other computer, do all this work, swap it out, and then a couple months down the road, if that new hard drive fails, then we're going to be back here doing the same thing over again. That's not to say a new hard drive won't fail on you, but it's less likely, especially if it's an older spinning disk drive that's in this laptop here. Definitely going to be at risk for having to replace it a lot sooner. And so we'll be a lot better off if we can just put a new one in there, especially a solid state drive, make this thing boot up a lot quicker, run a lot faster, a lot better performance, along with, you know, potentially a lot longer lifespan, so get a lot more usage out of this older laptop. Whereas, you know, typically, you know, you might want to just say, yeah, just go get a new one, spend a few $100s, buy another laptop, you know, a low-end laptop, you know, or if you have, you know, relatively, you know, decent laptop, maybe it's older, a few years old, and, you know, you're just thinking, you know, well, by the time I get another hard drive, or, you know, fix this one, you know, is it really worth it? It's like, well, for the cost of a new drive, and you know, what it costs, you know, have somebody back it up and everything else, you know, compared to, you know, having to go buy a brand new one, you might be better off just upgrading your old one and getting some more life out of it. You know, why go buy a new one when your old one can be upgraded to run, you know, really well? Like I said, with these solid state drives, it's definitely a big performance boost. So we get everything switched over here off this other drive onto this new drive and get it installed, and hopefully, if all goes well, we'll have a laptop will be back up and running, get this back to the customer, and they'll definitely be happy with this new setup. Like I said, they'll definitely get quite a bit more life out of this laptop versus having to go spend, you know, several $100s buying a new laptop. Well, I think I got everything pretty much transferred here off this old drive. I had a casing and a little adapter for the hard drive. We'll get this stuck back down in there and get it set up. Get it in there. It should be back in business. This, I'm not sure. This doesn't quite look right. Like this, maybe for some reason. Yeah, that's right. Just didn't quite look correct inside there, but that's how it goes. So, get this cover back on there and get the battery stuck back in it. Get it booted up. Get Windows back on there. We'll be in good business, good shape here. Good business. Good shape. However you want to say it. This is usually the least time-consuming portion of this process. Usually the biggest portion is getting the operating system reinstalled and everything set back up and all the files transferred back over and what have you. That's usually the lengthy part of the process. Installing a new hard drive is typically relatively simple. Let's see if it'll at least power on, and if everything, looks like I forgot to, one screw came out somewhere. That wasn't even a screw that I don't think I took loose. Put that back in there for him. Maybe. Go there. Let's see what's going on here. There's a screw in there, so where did this screw come from? Let's see. All those screws are in right here. I think I did take that one out. Alright, so that's back in. just put back in here. Flip it over. Turn this on. And see what happens. Obviously, it's not going to boot. She's needing a new screen for this as well. Operating system not found, but it did find the hard drive, so that is a plus. Alright, so I'm going to get the operating system installed, and then we'll get this back up together, and then we'll be back. Alright everybody, so I'm back. I got Windows installed on this machine, got the hard drive set up. I've already installed Windows, and as you notice now the green line is gone, so after it's warmed up a bit it's disappeared. So there's definitely another issue there with that controller for the screen or the screen itself. So at some point probably going to need to fix that, but for now it seems to be working fine. But I decided to make this into a kind of a two-part video because I'm installing Linux alongside Windows. And so for any of you who have wondered what that all entailed, and you know, if it was going to affect your Windows installation or not, it will not, typically, unless you kind of tell it to. But otherwise, you always have the option of just trying out Linux alongside it. Most of the time they have a live distribution available for most of the major distros that are out there. This one here is a pretty popular one. It's Ubuntu. I like it a lot. It's pretty simple to use and pretty straightforward. Typically it has most all the drivers for most machines that are, you know, out there. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and install this, and this shouldn't take too awful long. It should be pretty straightforward. So to install it, basically you got the USB drive set up here with Linux already made a startup disk with it, and just stick it in, reboot the computer, and as long as you know your USB is set to, as the first boot device, typically it will go ahead and boot from there. If not, you'll need to configure that in your BIOS to let it know, or open the boot menu up. Usually be an option like F8 or F11 when you're during the initial power on of your computer, to allow you to enter a boot menu to choose which device you want to boot from initially. Once it's booted, we can just click on it'll present you with this screen here, and then we just click install to go ahead and begin the installation of Ubuntu. And we'll just go ahead and continue. And we're not going to connect to any network right now. And it gives us a couple different options: normal or minimal installation, and then whether or not we want to install some third-party software, in which we're going to go ahead and select that, which will kind of give us a few different things. We'll select that, normal installation. And then, as always, once you get it all set up, and if you have internet connection, there's always a few other things that you typically want to install, especially if you like to play DVDs. Some DVDs won't play by default. You'll have to kind of install a few things to get that going, but it's pretty simple. And I'll probably make another video on that, on how to get that set up. So here it's asking us what kind of installation type we want, because it recognizes that we already have currently a version of Windows installed on it. So what would we like to do? We'd like to install Ubuntu alongside Windows 7, or erase and install Ubuntu, a clean install. And we're just going to install Ubuntu alongside, because we want to have both OSs on here. Or you can always choose something else if you are a more advanced user and you know how you want to partition your disk and where you want the Linux installation installed to. this is telling us what it's thinking about doing as far as dividing up the drive, and how we want to basically partition that. If we want to, it's basically trying to do equal partitions. If we want to give less or more to one partition, you know, one operating system or the other, whether or not we want to have the Windows partition here to be larger or smaller. If we select right here in the middle, we can kind of drag between the two and select the size, and we're just going to set the Linux version down to about 100 gigs, so that should give us plenty of space, as it won't be the primary operating system, but it will kind of give us just enough to install a few things, and also even to use it as kind of a backup for Linux, as far as if something happens, or a backup for Windows. If Windows crashes or something, we always have another operating system that we can boot into potentially, and hopefully recover whatever we have on this partition from our Windows partition, or vice versa. Trying to access the Linux partition from Windows, at least with Windows 7, is a little more intuitive. You'll need a third-party application to do that. Natively, it won't typically be able to recognize the Linux partition. However, in Linux, you'll be able to see most everything that's on your Windows partition, or you can always go for the advanced partitioning. And this looks good for us right now, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and install that. Letting us know that partition it's going to make changes to the hard drive, and that once we continue with this, we can't revert back, at least not easily. So we'll just making sure that this is exactly what we want to do, and we're going to say, yeah, go ahead and continue. So this is what we want to do. So now it's going to go ahead and partition the disk and get it set up. Again, it's asking us basically that we want to confirm that that's exactly what we want to do. And yes, that means we're here in the Midwest. We're going to select the Chicago time zone. And typically you can type in explicitly where you're at if you'd like. Not really much of a need to, because as far as the time zone goes, it's usually Chicago for the Midwest. We're just going to continue with that, and we'll go ahead and type this user's name in, and we can leave the other things set up the same. Password, we're just going to set a default easy password, and then the user can change that when they get their computer back. And it's going to go ahead and copy files. If you want to watch the copying file process, you can kind of see kind of a more detailed output of what's going on. If you kind of select down here, if you don't, you can just kind of leave that and watch the file progress. It shouldn't take too long. Usually Linux is a fairly quick installation, depending on your setup, what all you have going on. So let this do its thing, and then once we get done, then we should be able to go ahead and reboot the computer and start, and it should prompt us to give us an option for what operating system we want to boot into, and we'll be able to choose whether or not we want to boot into Windows or Linux. And if we decide that we always want it to boot into one operating system or the other, there's always ways to change that later as well. And so I plan to make some more detailed videos on how to configure and set up these multi-boot installations, or multi-OS boot installations, and what you need to do to configure that. Myself personally, at home with my computer, I usually just have a separate hard drive for my Windows installation, as it tends to make things easier for me, but I have drive bays that I can just remove and install pretty easily to get that set up and going. So, but you know, for for most users, it makes more sense, especially if you have a laptop, unless you have an external drive with one operating system on it that you want to, keep separate. You can just, excuse me, if you have just a laptop that you just kind of carry around with you to have multiple installations, or if you have multiple operating systems on one drive, then you just kind of have it prompt you which operating system you want to boot into during the startup process. Now it's going to actually install, which again, this shouldn't take too awful long. Typically, it's a fairly quick drive, and the USB drive is probably the major bottleneck. We'll see how long this actually takes. Shouldn't take too long. Seems like it's going pretty quick, pretty straightforward and easy going. And I had a hard time several years ago switching over to Linux. Initially, I didn't know how to do without, especially some of my games and stuff like that. And now with things like Steam and just the progression of games and more people using Linux distributions, I think a lot of game manufacturers have come to realize this and have started writing their games to work for both operating systems, Linux or Microsoft. And so it's not so much of a feat anymore. Some games are a bit trickier to get going. You still have to, do some configuration to get things set up and working. But for the most part, it's not too bad. There's some applications that still won't really work natively on Linux. You may have to install, some third-party app like Wine to get going, and even then, there's still a few apps that won't work without, doing some major work, and it's at that rate, it's almost not worth it. But usually, if there's an application that you're using on Windows, typically there's an alternative that you can find on Linux that's pretty comparable. I know there's some things that on Windows that it's hard to find an alternative that works well on Linux, but like I said, for me personally, it's been a little bit of a struggle. It was a struggle initially, but after some time, I've gotten to where I rarely ever use Windows anymore. Not that I'm trying to promote Linux by any means, but to each their own. They both have their pros and cons. For me personally, though, I just like the idea of having free software or open source and having, not having to necessarily pay for proprietary software. I like being able to just, download a version of Linux that I like and install it, and not have to worry about entering serial keys and activation and those kinds of things, which can get frustrating, especially every couple of years. It seems like you have to buy a new copy of an operating system. That can definitely become frustrating. So anyway, this is finished, so now it's just saying the installation is complete. You need to restart the computer to use the new installation, so we just click restart now, and then after we click this, it should prompt us to remove the USB drive, and then hit enter to restart. Here we go. So it's asking us to remove the USB drive, and then press enter, and now it's going to go ahead and restart. And then here in a minute, after it gets done with this initial post from the BIOS, it should go ahead and ask us what operating system we want to, ideally, if everything went like it's supposed to. Yep, so now it's prompting us whether or not we want, and it normally will have a countdown down here. I don't know if you noticed that, about a 10-second countdown. Like I said, you can always change and configure those things, and I'll get a video made for that, kind of go into some more depth on how to configure those things. But initially now we're in this boot menu, and it's asking us by default for the Ubuntu installation, or if and it gives us a couple other options, advanced options for Ubuntu, memory test, or if we want to boot to Windows 7. We'll go ahead and boot into Ubuntu initially just to kind of see if it boots up correctly. And you see it's should be fairly quick with this SSD that we've installed in here. So it shouldn't take us too long. After we get this started, we'll go ahead and do a reboot and then log into Windows and just see. We'll go ahead and let this finish booting into, or logging into Linux here, and see what happens. Might be able to see my reflection. Alright. Looks like everything's working there, so we'll go ahead and restart. And we'll boot into Windows to verify that that's still working correctly. Everything should be good. Gotta have my coffee in my Star Wars cup. Alright, as you see, it's basically counting down here. Just give us about 10 seconds to make a selection, or we can hit the arrow keys to stop the countdown. And then we'll just select Windows 7 installation. Let it go ahead and boot to that. And it's wanting to check. We're going to go ahead and skip it because we know everything's okay. So there's Windows, it's booted. You see, it's fairly quick with this SSD. So there's Windows, and now it's working. Everything's up and going, so we're good to go. And that's it, everybody. Pretty straightforward. I hope you enjoyed my video. Thumb it up if you like it, and leave comments below. That should be that's pretty much everything I have for you guys. Hope you enjoyed watching, like I said, and I plan to make some more videos soon for you guys on some more advanced topics. And if you something in particular you want, definitely leave a comment and let me know what you'd like to see, what you'd like me to do. Thanks again. Have a great day.